Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the CSS Endeavour, watching the massive Galactic diplomatic vessel approach through the void of space. Its crystalline surface reflected starlight in mesmerizing patterns, a display of technological superiority that the alien species was known for. 20 years of deep space exploration had prepared humanity for first contact, but nothing could have prepared them for the Galactic's contempt. "They're hailing us again," Admiral Lieutenant Rodriguez reported from his communication station. "Their message remains unchanged." Chen's jaw tightened. For 3 days, the Galactic had repeated the same demand. Submit to biological evaluation and prove human worth, or be classified as a primitive species unworthy of galactic citizenship. Their scans had already detected humanity's biological inefficiencies, their need for sleep, their limited lifespan, their susceptibility to radiation. "Send them our response again," Chen ordered, her voice steady despite the tension. "The United Earth Council welcomes scientific exchange, but we will not submit to experimentation as a prerequisite for diplomatic relations." The Galactic's response came swiftly, this time in a different tone. Their holographic projection materialized in the center of the bridge. Supreme Overseer Zixtal, their crystalline form pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that humans had learned indicated disdain. "Your resistance to evaluation proves our initial assessment." Zixtal's translated voice reverberated through the bridge. "A species that cannot even recognize its own limitations cannot be trusted with advanced technology. You will be classified as Category 4, primitive biological entity. All human vessels are hereby restricted to their solar system until sufficient evolution occurs." Chen stepped forward, her dark eyes meeting the Overseer's crystalline sensors. "With respect, Overseer, you're making a mistake. Humanity's strength isn't in our biology. It's in our adaptability, our creativity, Your primitive protein-based neural networks cannot possibly comprehend the complexities of galactic civilization." Zixtal interrupted. "We have encountered thousands of species like yours. Those who resist classification either evolve or become extinct. Choose wisely." The hologram disappeared, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Chen turned to her crew, seeing the same determination in their eyes that she felt in her heart. The Galactic had made a critical error. They had judged humanity solely by their physical limitations, ignoring the very traits that had taken them to the stars. "Orders, Admiral," Captain James Morris asked, his hand steady on the tactical console. Chen smiled grimly. "Send an encrypted burst transmission to Earth. Tell them everything. The Galactics want to see evolution. Let's show them how humans adapt." Within hours, the Galactic ship departed, leaving behind their automated quarantine beacons, crystalline structures designed to prevent human ships from leaving the solar system. They didn't bother hiding their technology, believing humans too primitive to understand it. But as Chen watched the alien ship disappear into fold space, she knew something the Galactics didn't. In the 3 days of negotiations, every sensor on the Endeavour had been analyzing their technology. Every conversation had been studied for patterns. Every display of superiority had revealed something about their thinking. "Begin Project Phoenix," she ordered. "If they think we're primitive now, wait until they see what humanity does when backed into a corner." In the months that followed, humanity would prove that true strength isn't measured in biological perfection or technological superiority. It's measured in the ability to adapt, to innovate, and to turn apparent weaknesses into unprecedented advantages. The Galactics had made their judgment based on what they could measure and quantify. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strengths were the things their sensors couldn't detect: determination, creativity, and the unshakable will to prove them wrong. The quarantine beacons blinked in the void, their crystalline surfaces reflecting the light of 1,000 stars. They were meant to be humanity's prison walls. Instead, they would become humanity's first step toward showing the galaxy what primitive humans could really do. And in her quarters that night, Admiral Chen began drafting the plans that would change everything. The Kralix had given humanity two choices: submit or be isolated. They never considered the third option, that humans would find a way to turn their prison into an opportunity. 6 months after the Kralix quarantine began, the Mars Research Complex had transformed from a colonial outpost into humanity's greatest laboratory. In Chamber 7, Dr. Maya Patel watched as her team's latest experiment unfolded behind radiation-hardened glass. The crystalline shard they'd salvaged from a quarantine beacon pulsed with inner light as it interfaced with their hybrid computer system. Where the Kralix had expected humans to be baffled by their technology, they'd instead inspired an unprecedented wave of innovation. Neural interface is stable, Dr. Patil announced, her fingers dancing across holographic displays. The crystal responds to human brainwaves just like it does to Kralix consciousness. Different frequency, same principle. Beside her, Dr. David Cohen nodded, his cybernetic eye whirring as it captured every detail. They thought our primitive brains were a weakness. They never considered that our neural plasticity might be an advantage. The discovery had been almost accidental. While the Kralix's crystalline technology was indeed superior in many ways, it was also rigid, optimized for their specific form of consciousness. Human brains, with their inefficient protein networks, could actually adapt and form new neural pathways to interface with the alien tech in ways the Kralix had never imagined. In another section of the complex, Admiral Chen stood with Earth's leading xenobiologists, watching a demonstration that would have shocked their alien observers. Dr. Sarah Wong, her body connected to a network of sensors, was sleeping. Their biggest criticism was our need for sleep, Dr. Wong had explained earlier. But during sleep, our brains process information in ways their crystalline networks can't replicate. We're not just resting. We're evolving our neural patterns in real time. The data flowing from her sleeping form proved it. Human dreams, far from being a weakness, were actually an incredible form of parallel processing. While the Kralix processed information in linear, crystalline perfection, human minds created chaotic but brilliant new connections during their sleep cycles. Send the latest data to Project Phoenix, Chen ordered, especially the neural plasticity readings. Across the solar system, similar breakthroughs were happening daily. The Kralix quarantine, meant to contain humanity, had instead created a pressure cooker of innovation. Every limitation they'd identified was being turned into an unexpected advantage. On Luna Base, engineers had discovered that human visual limitations actually allowed them to perceive patterns in Kralix technology that the aliens themselves missed. The crystalline structures, optimized for their superior vision, contained layers of information in spectrums they took for granted. Human eyes, with their primitive rod and cone cells, could detect subtle variations that revealed potential vulnerabilities. Their entire defense grid is built on assumptions, Lieutenant Emma Martinez explained during a briefing. They assume any species advanced enough to breach it would have to see the way they do. They never considered that our inferior vision might let us see things they can't. But perhaps the most significant breakthrough came from an unexpected source. In a secure facility beneath the Pacific Ocean, Dr. James Chen, no relation to the Admiral, had made a discovery about human genetic inefficiency. The Kralix modified their genome to remove all redundancies, he explained to the project leaders. They saw our genetic diversity as chaos, our redundant DNA as waste. But that waste is actually our greatest strength. He brought up a holographic display showing human DNA alongside Kralix genetic structures. Their perfection is their weakness. They can't adapt without purposeful modification. But humans, our messy genome lets us adapt naturally. We don't just evolve through technology. We evolve biologically, generation by generation. Admiral Chen absorbed all these reports with growing satisfaction. The Kralix had judged humanity by their standards of perfection, never understanding that perfection itself could be a limitation. Humans weren't perfect. They were adaptable. They didn't have superior natural capabilities. They had the drive to overcome their limitations in creative ways. "Begin Phase 2, she ordered during a global command meeting. "The Craolix gave us time to prove our worth. Let's use it to prove something else entirely. That true advancement comes not from achieving perfection, but from learning to turn every weakness into a strength." As the order went out, humanity's hidden advantages were about to become apparent. The Craolix had imprisoned what they saw as a primitive species. Instead, they had given humanity exactly what it needed: a challenge to overcome, limitations to adapt to, and most importantly, the motivation to prove them wrong. In the depths of space, the quarantine beacons continued their vigilant watch, their crystalline surfaces glowing with apparent superiority. They were about to witness something their creators had never expected: the power of imperfection, the strength of adaptability, and the unstoppable force of human determination. 1 year into the quarantine, the Craolix patrol fleet emerged from fold space for their routine inspection of Earth's containment zone. Supreme Overseer Zixtal expected to find what they always found with primitive species: desperate attempts to copy their superior technology, failed experiments, and growing resignation to their restricted status. What they found instead made their crystalline forms pulse with unprecedented patterns of confusion. The quarantine beacons were still in place, still functioning perfectly, but something was different. The human ships they detected weren't the same crude vessels they'd encountered before. These ships seemed to ripple and shift, their surfaces somehow both solid and fluid, defying the Craolix's sophisticated scanning systems. "Impossible," Zixtal declared, their crystalline form flickering with agitation. "Their technology was centuries behind ours. These readings cannot be accurate." On the bridge of the CSS Prometheus, Admiral Chen watched the Craolix fleet's arrival with calm satisfaction. "Status of the neural interface?" she asked. "Operating at 98% efficiency," Lieutenant Rodriguez reported. "The ship's adaptive systems are responding to crew thoughts faster than manual controls ever could. The Craolix won't be able to lock onto us. We're changing faster than their targeting systems can adapt." The Prometheus represented humanity's first true leap forward. Instead of trying to replicate Craolix technology, they'd created something entirely new. The ship's hull was made of programmable matter infused with human neural patterns. Every crew member's thoughts contributed to its constant evolution, making it not just a vessel, but a living extension of human consciousness. "They're scanning us again," Dr. Wong announced from her station. She had just woken from a 6-hour sleep cycle, her mind fresh with new neural patterns that were already being incorporated into the ship's adaptive systems. "Their confusion is obvious in their scan patterns. They keep trying to categorize us according to their technological hierarchy." Chen smiled. "Let's show them something they really won't understand. Initiate Project Morpheus." Across the solar system, hidden platforms activated. But instead of weapons or shields, they began broadcasting dreams. Human dreams, countless neural patterns collected from sleeping volunteers, transmitted directly into the Craolix's crystalline communication networks. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. The Craolix, with their perfect but rigid information processing systems, had no defense against the beautiful chaos of human dreams. Their communications filled with fragments of human imagination, emotion, and creativity, concepts their ordered minds struggled to comprehend. "What is this?" Zixtal demanded, their translated voice showing the first signs of uncertainty any human had ever heard from the Craolix. "Some form of attack." "Not an attack, Overseer," Chen responded, opening a direct channel. "We're sharing our dreams with you. The neural patterns your species dismissed as primitive sleep states. We thought you might be interested in seeing what our inefficient brains can create." The Craolix ship's crystalline surfaces began to pulse erratically as their crews struggled to process the flood of human consciousness. They had never encountered anything like this, not an attack of weapons or technology, but an overwhelming demonstration of the power of human mental adaptation. "Your quarantine taught us something important," Chen continued. You judged us by our biological limitations, but those limitations forced us to evolve in ways your perfect systems never could. While you were watching for us to copy your technology, we were learning to turn our very consciousness into a tool you couldn't understand. The Prometheus moved closer to the Kralix fleet, its hull shifting through patterns that echoed human brainwaves. The ship wasn't just displaying technology, it was demonstrating evolution. Every second, it adapted and changed, incorporating new patterns from its crew's neural networks. Perhaps, Chen suggested, it's time to reconsider your classification of our species. We may not have your biological perfection or your crystalline technology, but we have something you've never seen before, the ability to turn our dreams into reality. In the space around them, more human ships emerged from hiding, each one a unique blend of technology and consciousness. They hadn't tried to break the quarantine. They had used it as an opportunity to develop something entirely new. The Kralix fleet hung motionless in space, their perfect crystalline systems overwhelmed by the complexity of human innovation. They had come to check on their prisoners, only to find that the prison had become a crucible of evolution. And in that moment, as human dreams danced through their communication networks, the Kralix began to understand their mistake. They had imprisoned a species that didn't need to escape. They just needed a reason to prove what they were truly capable of. Dr. Maya Patel spent countless hours studying the Kralix neural patterns captured during their last encounter. While others focused on their technology, she saw something deeper in the crystalline species' reactions to human consciousness, something that looked surprisingly like fear. In her lab aboard the Prometheus, she reviewed the data for the 1000th time. The Kralix's response to human dreams wasn't just confusion, it was recognition. Their perfect, crystalline minds had experienced something they thought they'd eliminated from their species eons ago: uncertainty. "Admiral," she called Chen to her lab late one night. "I think I understand why they really quarantined us. It wasn't about our primitive biology at all." Chen studied the complex neural maps floating in the holographic display. "Explain." "Look at their baseline neural patterns." Patel highlighted a series of perfectly ordered crystalline structures. "Now watch what happens when we introduced human dream patterns." The perfect structures showed microscopic fractures, tiny imperfections in their ordered geometry. "They're destabilizing," Chen asked. "No, they're remembering," Patel corrected. The Kralix didn't evolve as crystalline beings. They engineered themselves to be this way. They chose perfect order over biological chaos. But when exposed to human consciousness, their original patterns tried to reassert themselves. The implications were staggering. The Kralix hadn't quarantined humanity because they were primitive. They'd done it because human consciousness threatened the very foundation of their engineered perfection. On the bridge of the Kralix flagship, Supreme Overseer Zixtal was experiencing something their species had not known for millennia: doubt. The human ships surrounding them weren't just displaying advanced technology. They were broadcasting a kind of mental freedom that the Kralix had sacrificed in their pursuit of perfection. "Your neural patterns are changing." "Overseer," Chen's voice came through their communication systems. "We can see the original Kralix consciousness trying to break through your crystalline programming." "Impossible," Zixtal responded, but their voice carried an unfamiliar tremor. "We chose perfection. We ascended beyond biological limitation." "Did you choose?" Dr. Patel joined the conversation. "Or did your ancestors make that choice for you?" "We've studied your neural patterns. The crystalline structure isn't your natural state. It's a prison, just like the one you tried to put us in." Throughout the Kralix fleet, crew members began experiencing unprecedented sensations. The human dreams had awakened something in their crystalline minds. Echoes of emotions they thought long extinct, memories of a time before perfect order. "We've discovered something interesting about perfection," Chen continued. "It's static, unchanging. But life, real life, requires adaptation, change, even chaos. You engineered these things out of your species, but you couldn't completely erase them. They're still there, waiting to be remembered. The Craolix ship's perfect formations began to waver. Across their fleet, crew members were experiencing what their species had labeled as impossible. Individual thoughts, unique perspectives, the first stirrings of creativity in countless generations. Your ancestors chose a path to perfection, Paddle added, her voice gentle with understanding. But they couldn't predict the future. They couldn't know what challenges their descendants would face. By eliminating adaptation from your species, they may have actually limited your true potential. In that moment, something unprecedented happened. Zixtal's crystalline form began to pulse with patterns that hadn't been seen in their species for thousands of years, patterns of individual expression. Zixtal hesitated, experiencing individual thought for the first time. We may have been wrong, not just about humans, but about perfection itself. Around them, the human ships continued their dance of constant adaptation, each one a testament to the power of imperfection, of growth, of change. They had not come to fight the Craolix or break their quarantine. Instead, they had done something far more profound. They had reminded an ancient species of what they had lost in their quest for perfection. And as the Craolix fleet hung in space, their crew experiencing the first taste of individual consciousness in millennia, humanity demonstrated perhaps their greatest strength: the ability to understand and empathize with those who had tried to imprison them. The quarantine, meant to contain a primitive species, had instead begun to free an advanced one from their self-imposed constraints. It was a victory not of technology or force, but of humanity's unique ability to see beyond surface differences and understand the deeper truths that connected all conscious beings. 3 months after the awakening of the Craolix fleet, Earth's orbital space had become a symbol of unprecedented transformation. The crystalline ships now orbited alongside human vessels, their once perfect formations showing subtle variations that would have been unthinkable a year ago. In the newly established Joint Evolution Center floating above the Pacific, Admiral Chen watched as Dr. Patul worked with a young Craolix scientist named Vex. Unlike the rigid crystalline forms of their past, Vex's surface showed flowing patterns that reflected their emerging individuality. The integration of human neural patterns with our crystalline structure, Vex explained, their voice carrying the music of genuine emotion. It creates something entirely new. Not perfect, but alive. Growing. The breakthrough had come when humanity offered not to fight the Craolix, but to help them remember who they had been before the age of engineered perfection. The quarantine beacons, once symbols of imprisonment, had been repurposed as bridges between the two species' consciousness. Your ancestors chose perfection because they feared chaos, Dr. Paddle said, monitoring the neural interfaces connecting human and Craolix minds. But we're showing you, that chaos and order can coexist, that imperfection can be a path to greater advancement than perfection ever allowed. Across the solar system, similar collaborations were taking place. Human ships, with their adaptive neural interfaces, worked alongside Craolix vessels whose crews were slowly rediscovering their capacity for creativity and individual thought. The rigid hierarchy that had ruled their society for millennia was transforming into something more dynamic, more resilient. Supreme Overseer Zixtal, who had once condemned humanity as primitive, now stood before the Galactic Council, their crystalline form showing patterns of humility and wisdom that would have been impossible before. We came to teach, but we learned instead. They addressed the assembled representatives of countless species. Humanity showed us that true advancement lies not in achieving perfection, but in maintaining the ability to adapt, to grow, to dream. The council chamber hummed with discussion. Other species that had faced Craolix judgment in the past watched with fascination as the once rigid species demonstrated their transformation. The quarantine we imposed, Zixtal continued, became the catalyst for both our species' evolution. Humanity didn't break free from their containment. They transformed it into an opportunity for mutual growth. They taught us that strength lies not in eliminating weakness, but in learning to turn every limitation into a source of new potential. Admiral Chen, standing beside Zixtal as Earth's representative, added her own perspective. We could have used our discoveries to fight back, to prove our superiority. Instead, we chose to understand, to empathize, and ultimately to help. That's humanity's true strength, not our technology or our adaptability, but our capacity to reach out to those who once called us enemies and help them grow alongside us. The implications rippled through galactic society. The Krallics, once feared for their rigid enforcement of technological and biological standards, were becoming something new, a species that combined their crystalline precision with rediscovered creativity and emotion. Their transformation sparked a revolution in galactic thinking about evolution, advancement, and the true meaning of superiority. In Earth orbit, the Joint Evolution Center became a symbol of this new understanding. Human scientists worked alongside Krallic researchers, each bringing their unique perspectives to challenges that neither species could have solved alone. The human capacity for creative chaos complemented Krallic's precision, creating innovations that defied traditional classification. We thought we were alone in our perfection, Vex reflected, watching their crystalline form ripple with new patterns of thought. Instead, we were alone in our stagnation. Humanity didn't just survive our judgment. They freed us from our own. The quarantine beacons, still orbiting the solar system, no longer broadcast warnings about a primitive species. Instead, they transmitted a new message to passing ships. Here lies the boundary not of containment, but of transformation. Enter to learn what humanity taught the Krallics, that true strength lies not in perfection, but in the courage to embrace change. And as ships from across the galaxy began arriving to witness this unprecedented collaboration, humanity had achieved something far greater than merely proving their worth. They had shown that true victory doesn't come from defeating an enemy, but from transforming them into allies. In doing so, they hadn't just earned their place among the stars. They had changed the very definition of what it meant to be an advanced civilization. The age of engineered perfection was over. The age of adaptive evolution had begun, and humanity, with all their beautiful imperfections, was leading the way.